All right, hello guys. This will be session one um, on the basics of design, theory of design in general, without getting specific as to any software. More about the principles of design that will help us to use the softwares better. Session one will be more of an overview on the elements of design. Well, first by trying to answer the question, what design is. Then we'll very briefly discuss some of the different principles, philosophies that are used when it comes to the designing process, and then spend the majority of the time talking about the different elements or objects we use in designing process. And then we'll end with the next step. What is design? Qualitatively speaking, design is the balance between three distinct attributes: functionality, accessibility, and aesthetics. Functionality is how a system works, how well it works. It's integral to design. A lot of people have a misunderstanding that design is how something looks like, whether it's beautiful. It's really how it works, what is going on inside that design primarily concerns about. Second, accessibility, how easy it is to use that thing. Usually it's a product or a machine, or it can be a software. The ease of access is just as important as functionality. And finally, what is becoming more and more important since competency between products is becoming comparable is aesthetics, how beautiful it is. A lot of people decide between similar products by choosing that which looks better. So aesthetics is also a key factor when it comes to decision making on the part of the customer. So good design strikes a balance between these three aspects within the constraints imposed by the reality. Now, if we get more specific, what does design use? What do we? How do we really design a product? One can define design as the manipulation of sensory objects, which can be accessed via the user interface. Now, sensory objects could be anything. It could be, as in the case of a newspaper, it could be a text. Newspapers can also contain photographs, then it becomes visual. There can also be a sound involved. Now, if you combine those three, you have visual media. Any film or music video, almost websites It's a combination of verbal, visual, and auditory. Words, shapes, colors, animation, as well as sound, which can include music as well. Now, if it is a real product in front of you, we have the sense of touch involved. Now, this could be subtle as well in the case of, say, a mobile app, or if you're accessing a website using a tablet or a mobile device, then that device can respond by vibrating when you touch certain areas or when you perform certain actions. So you can get a sort of feedback from it in that way. So in other words, design is how we set up the product to react and give us feedback uh, and interact with us through our senses. We see, we read, we hear, and we feel certain changes when we perform actions um, on the product or on the machine through the user interface. The interface could be a screen, or it could be a control panel, or whatever. Now, what is not contained within this framework here is, say, a design of something like a process. For example, a design of a road layout or a traffic flow. Now, that's a little abstract. So people don't directly read about the layout or see it happen, but the way they move gives some information as to how it has been designed. Now, one curious thing about design is that most of the good designs are invisible. You don't notice them. It's only when design becomes bad, then it becomes noticeable, and you start facing problems. And this rule or this behavior can be seen in any aspect of design. Say the font or music. If a book has a very good font that's easy to read, you won't even notice or think about the font. You'll be more involved, or you'll be more concerned about what the message is being conveyed. Or say you're talking about the background music in a play or a film. Unless you're looking for it, you won't be thinking about the music. You'll be engrossed with the drama or the story. Music would be supporting the message that's being conveyed. But if the music is bad, or if there is any distractions, or if one side of the speaker is not working properly, then you would notice that something is off. So good design is almost always invisible. When design becomes less than perfect, then humans start to notice its presence. All right, let's very quickly talk about some major principles involved in the design process. The design process can be classified depending on what or where the focus is placed. It can be a process-centered, user-centered, or human-centered. User-centered and human-centered tend to have a lot of overlap. Let's first start with a process-centered design. Now, this is used mainly in business applications. Say you're creating software for a business process or activity, or it's an interface in In a machine, industrial machine, the biggest priority is for that application or for that machine to work at maximum productivity. Now, they're going to be used by the employees of the company. It's not going to be sold to a third party. It's not going to be supplied to a vendor and distributed to the public. What happens is user experience as well as aesthetics, they tend to take a lower priority in this case. An example would be a call center software used by a customer support agent. It does affect the customer in the sense that how well that software works, but the customer never sees the user interface. It's only the customer support agent who uses it. As long as it gives them information, helps them to process the requests faster, the end user, the customer, is happy. And the streamlining of the process is what takes the highest priority in this approach to design. On the other hand, user experience takes the highest priority when it comes to user-centered design. Now this is achieved through many ways, including the simplicity of the design, how intuitive the actions are, and how easy it is to learn how to use that product or the software or the machine. There should also be a high level of transparency, a clarity between the intended results and the required actions. When a customer or a user looks at this machine or a product, they will have expectations as to what it should do. And when they look at the interface, they should be able to intuitively get an understanding as to how to do it. If a product requires a customer to read a manual, spend some time, learning about it, or if there is a steep learning curve to start using it, then it reduces the user experience, the quality of the user experience of the product. A good example of user-centered design would be that of toys. Toys are more like a plug-and-play device. You unwrap it, you give it to a child, and then the child knows how to play with it. You don't have to teach a child how to use the toy. They're very, very intuitive. Now, something that's even more involved and a little less business-centric is the human-centered design. Now, this was developed when automation and computation started taking over the jobs of humans. So there was a growing need to preserve the value and the importance of humans in the workplace. So human-centered design, what it does is it involves the humans, the users, at all stages of the design process. Keeping in mind that humans can provide insights that machines or AI or any set of data cannot provide. Computers can provide computational work. They can analyze data, they can provide results, but in the end, it's the humans and preferably the users that help refine and design the product. Curiously, this started as a method of a placemaking or a community building in Scandinavian countries, where local administrations would involve the residents in the planning of the neighborhood, or what they want to do with the natural resources and so on. So the user is also a stakeholder. So everyone who is remotely involved in the effect, the consequences of creating a product or a design, or whether it's a business product or it's a social or a political, social-political a framework, they're all involved in the entire process. In a sense, it's a form of problem solving. So everyone who's going to be affected by the solution gets involved in the problem solving process. We will be focusing mostly on the user-centered design. So we want to maximize the quality of the user experience by making their design simple, intuitive, and very, very easy to learn. All right, moving on to the elements of design. So elements of design are many, and you can discover more of them as you get more and more creative. But there are some fundamental basic ones which fall under the categories that we saw before, like verbal, visual, sound, or tactile. They could even be a smell. For example, in a hotel industry, the user experience could involve how the room smell or how their dining area smells. Um, it could even be how people move, how easy it is for people to move through the hotel. Or it can be something that it's abstract, like how well the customers get treated, the friendliness of the staff, the occasional complimentary gestures. They all contribute to the quality of the user experience. Now we are going to focus mainly, at least for today, on verbal and visual elements. We'll start with these 6 elements of design. Okay. Number 1, typography, which is a verbal aspect of design. The different types of font, how we use font, how we can manipulate font, and so on. Next is color. Probably the most simplest and striking quality of a visual medium. Secondly, thirdly, we look into briefly about images. Images is a combination of color and shapes. It's famously said that a picture or an image is equivalent to 1,000 words. And then we'll talk about graphic design. Now this uses images, pictures, maybe even animations, and other technical aspects of manipulating those graphic elements to create the effect we want and the experience we want to provide. Number 5 will be about putting many of these elements together, how to use it how to employ it, how to arrange them within a framework, within the constraints of the user interface. It could be a screen, it could be a dashboard, or it could be the entire city, or whatever. Then finally, in the context of a business, how can the elements of design aid in not only establishing a consistent brand, but also an identity to the brand? Brands have not only an appearance, but they also have an attitude or a quality. And we'll see some examples how this is brought out through design. Okay, let's look at these elements briefly, starting with typography. Typography is the use of type. Type as in type, the type which is used for printing, the letter blocks which were used in the early printing presses, which we now see as the different styles of alphabets. They're also referred to as font style. Stylistic fonts and types, they have a very strong character, and they evoke a type of mood in the design we create. So we find a wide variety and really stylistic fonts used in magazines or anything that uses it's needed for marketing, that wants to attract the attention, that wants to stand out, anything that wants to convey more than a simple message with a few words. So the billboard text, film poster, titles of articles, and so on. Generally speaking, within any project, say even within the context of magazines, the types of font used is kept to minimum. We will see that simplicity as an idea is often the common denominator in many designs. Even with using a fewer fonts, font styles, we could create interesting effects by changing other attributes of the font, like the font size, or the thickness of the font, spacing, hierarchy, where you place it. Many interesting ways of manipulating font. You don't have to change the font style to create a difference in the design. When it comes to user interface, say that uses a lot of text, like newspapers or articles in a magazine or in a website, the key is for it to be easy to read. Now, for instance, Times New Roman was commissioned to be designed by the New York Times in 1931 because they wanted a font that was very easy to be read on a printed sheet of paper. There are classes of there are class of fonts that are specifically designed to be used in large bodies of text. And there's also the other end of fonts, that's the display fonts, which are meant not for large bodies, but for titles and so on. And what you see here is examples of display fonts. Any of these fonts used in a large paragraph would be quite difficult to read. It will become tiring after a while. Titles, headings, they can be flashy. They can attract attention. How do we choose a font, whether it's for a title or for a large body of text? The first thing we need to keep in mind is that the font style should match the message we are trying to convey. Not just the message that's contained within the words, but also the message of the project. What attitude or what impression we want to create in the user when they look at the product or the design. Broadly speaking, can it be is it a casual experience for the person? Is it something neutral or something professional? Or is it meant to attract attention or create intrigue? Or it's more of a fun type of experience that you want to provide to the user. But whatever be the case, since fonts have been used for many, many years, there have been several popular fonts in the past, some of them have become overused, and we should steer clear from them. Now, those are the ones you see on the right side over here. Comic Sans, Jokerman, Hobo, and the others, they are overused. To use them in any professional project would be seen as amateurish. It will, in fact, to many users, it would be distracting. As mentioned before, in good design, the elements of design are not noticed. When someone reads a text or a verbal message, it's not the font they should be paying attention to, but the message that the font is trying to convey. Now, there's one particular aspect of font style that is well, that was hotly debated. And now it has been the debate has been settled for good. Now that's the debate between the use of serif and a font without serif. There are many font styles that have the word serif in their name, and they would have they could also have the term sans serif in them. Sans serif is a font that does not have the overhanging or the extensions of the letters that are represented here in dotted line. Those are the serifs. They were originally introduced in typography to make letters easy to read. And since originally typography was used for printed work, serif fonts or fonts which use serifs, they work well for printed bodies of work, like newspapers. You will notice if you pick up any English newspaper, most of them will use serif fonts to help them easier to read. This is not so when it comes to reading in a digital display. The rationale for this lies in the fact that even the best of digital displays don't have the same level of resolution as found in a printed work. The resolution is measured in dots per square inch. a printed, say like a magazine, will have a DPI, dots per square inch, about at least a few hundreds or even 1,000. The best digital displays are found in handheld devices rather than in computer screens, and they rarely go past 300 or 500 dpi. All right, so when do we use serif and when do we use sans? I mean, do we exclusively use sans in digital displays? Not really. If we survey the websites, we find that 40% of the text in the web are serif fonts, while 60% are sans. There is a shift in using more and more sans font, but serifs is not considered to be undesirable. They can be used if you want to send a certain type of message. For example, if you want to create a stylistic heading, if you want to give it a classic look, or if we are going to create templates or worksheets that are meant to be printed after being accessed online, then we will be using serif font for those things. Serif is also found in creatives like invitations, posters, infographics, and so on. Business websites are predominantly populated by sans serif text or text without serif. What is interesting is while the serif font was serif fonts with serif was created to make reading easier in the print for adults, sans type font are recommended for children because the letter sizes, the letters are simple. The brains don't need to spend more time processing them. Serif fonts are good in printed works, not only because it's easier to read, it also tends to clump together the words better. And these serifs, they help in distinguishing letters from each other, and they also kind of guide the eye to move from one letter to another. So it's more for fast reading. So to conclude, large bodies of text will use sans serif or fonts without serif. And for headings, or if you want to create an impression, like if you want to create a stylistic impression, if you want to give it a classic look, then you will use serif selectively. The next question is, how many fonts do we use in a project? We use as few as possible. 2 or 3 most times are sufficient. By changing other attributes of the font, we can create interest in the reader. Now, for example, in the image on the left, we see a recipe that's meant to be viewed on a tablet. The title is a serif type font, giving it a more old-fashioned or a classic look. And the rest is sans type font, sans serif. Even then, by making the subheading bold, making it italicized, we are able to make it distinct, even though the word ingredients and the rest of the recipe use the same font. By changing attributes, we are able to create a distinction between them. Other creative ways of bringing out variety is changing the font size, elongating the height of the letter, or making some parts of the text italicized, or changing the color of the text, creating strong contrast between the text and the background, or using all caps and lowercase. And that's for sure. See, you can place the text in different ways, and by only using a few font, we can create interesting effects. Well, let's get a little bit more technical. What are these? What are some of these technical fine adjustments that we can do? Most of us are familiar with making text bold, italicized, underlined, and so on. They may also be familiar with line spacing and letter spacing. Now, sometimes we may have to fine-tune the text to get the desired effect. One of the adjustments is known as kerning. Now here we see two examples of kerning. Kerning refers to the fine adjustment of spacing between the letters. By default, a font doesn't have equal spacing between the letters. That's because the letters themselves have different shapes. Now, this is not an issue with large bodies of text. It can actually be fine. It can be helpful for reading. But if the same is magnified, if it is a large font and used in a heading, then these small differences in the gap between the letters will become quite prominent. Then we would have to manually adjust the spacing between the letters to make them even. The rule of thumb is that whatever the font we are using, we should kern the titles. In addition to kerning, there are several other fine adjustments that can be done, which we'll take up later in the session, done exclusively for typography. Well, let's take another look at this design. We can see that there is a consistency in the font. The footer has a different type of font, but if we ignore that, if you look only at the main content, we see that it uses a single font. It creates contrast by changing one body of text as full caps, fully capitalized, and the other as lowercase. Also, there is contrast by using different colors, by changing the background. The text on the left has a white background, but text on the right has a different background provided by the shapes. Also, the font size is different. And there is one flaw over here. Now, this may not be apparent when we casually look at it. But if we look closely, if we zoom in, we find that the letters are not completely left aligned. Now, this is not because there is an extra space before the D. It's because the D and the letters below, they are of different font size. Therefore, the space, the empty space around that letter has changed. So what needs to be done is adjustment to the kern, or kerning has to be done manually. By default, Microsoft PowerPoint did not do that. While these lines were left aligned, kerning wasn't done automatically. We see this gap everywhere. And while the I and B have the same font size, we see that the different letters can also have different spaces around them. The black I and the black B, they are the same font size, but they don't have the same amount of empty space around them. So when it comes to web design, we may have to zoom in and inspect closely and find out if the alignment is proper. All right, let's move on to the next element of design, color. Colors make designs more impactful. We have color vision. Everything we see has color. And if something is monochromatic, it stands out. Well, that itself can be a stylistic choice. It can be used to create a sense of nostalgia or old-fashioned effect or feelings. Mostly, color brings life and vibrancy to a design. More than that, colors are integral to creating a brand identity. I mean, those two examples which you see here, there are two different approaches to using colors. The one in the top uses soft, toned down, subtle variations, subtle, very low contrast between the different colors used. There is still a consistent color palette. You see most of cream, beige, some gold. But below, it's the exact opposite. We have striking colors, strong colors, which contrast with each other. And this immediately creates a sense of playfulness or boldness, which is justified in the context here. These are images that were used for a marketing drive to boost the brand recognition, to create an impression in a person within a short span of time. What we see above is the color palette used in products that suits the function of the product, which is a cosmetic line of products. But also, it's not intended for marketing, but more of to create a consistent brand identity, something that's soft, something that's that shows quality, refinement, mainly by use of the or the gold. Now, how do we effectively choose colors? How do we use them? Color theory helps us to create interesting combinations. We'll look into color theory soon, at least we'll take an overview. Color theory also helps us to choose color palettes that can be used across a project. This color palette can be crucial to creating a brand identity, or it can be supportive of an existing brand identity. In addition to using color theory, we can also look for inspiration from studying existing pieces of art, say in the form of paintings or designs or even photographs of beautiful landscapes from nature, and we can get information about the combinations of color that create this aesthetic, this pleasing quality. When discussing color, you'll see mentions of terms like hues, saturation, and brightness, which collectively is known as the HSB system. We'll look more into that soon. To get a little bit more scientific, color is not a property of light. It's a common misunderstanding that different frequencies of light represent different colors. But in fact, it's the brain that creates the sensation of a color. And our brain can distinguish at least 2.3 million different colors. And some studies put that figure as high as 10 million. So the point is, there is a lot of colors to choose from. Not just the 7 colors that we usually find in a coloring in a set of coloring instruments. And the color theory helps us to navigate through all of these millions of different shades or different colors to find palettes that would work together and provide the desired effect. All right, let's get a little bit more technical. When dealing with colors, we need to decide whether these colors are going to be used for a digital screen or for printing. Depending on the medium, the primary colors changes. Primary colors are the true colors which are combined to create secondary, tertiary, and other colors. For the digital screen, which is what we will be using mostly, the primary colors are red, blue, and green. For instance, combining red and green, we get yellow. And these combinations are contained within the color wheel, which we see on the top right here. Now, there are many formulas which can be used to generate palettes. Palette represents a combination of colors which create good interplay between them. At the top right, we see the complementary colors being used to create a palette. There are other formulae like a tertiary, or choosing colors that are synonymous, that are closer to each other rather than opposite. And they can even be custom. We will get in detail about generating color palettes in a later session. Now, let's talk about how to talk about color, how to distinguish between them. Now, there are certain terms which are quite useful when describing colors. Those are the hue, tint, shade, and tone. Hue is a pure color. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's only a primary color. It can also include combinations of primary colors, secondary colors, tertiary colors, and so on. Now, once you combine colors, you get different hues. You start with the primary colors, you combine it, you get tertiary colors, you combine to secondary colors, and then you get tertiary colors, and so on. So all of these combinations generate different hues. Now, if you select one hue without adding any other primary color, you can create changes to it. How can those changes be made? Number one, if you add white to a hue, you make it lighter. You're creating tints of that hue or color. Hue and color can be interchanged. Now, if you add white to a hue or a color, you make it lighter, you're creating tints of it. If you add black to a color, then you're creating darker versions of that color. It's known as a shade. You're creating shades of that color. Then finally, if you make the color muted or less pronounced by adding gray to it, or in other words, adding both white and black to it, then you're creating different tones of the color. So you combine the primary colors in different ways to generate hues. For example, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, whatever. Blue, green, aquamarine, and so on. And then you add white to create tints of it. You add black to create shades of it, or you add both to create tones of it. Now, saturation tells us how pure a color is, meaning how less or how much is white, black, or both of them as gray is added to it. If there's very little white or very little gray, then it is highly saturated color. If there's a lot of white or black added to a color, then it's a desaturated color. Saturation also can be referred to as the purity of a color. And finally, we have luminance, the brightness of a color, how bright it is expressed in a display device. So hue or color is pure, tint is making it lighter by adding white, shade is making it darker by adding black, tone is by adding gray, which is a combination of both white and black, to make the color muted. Saturation tells us how pure a color is. Saturated colors, Highly saturated colors have very little additives. Desaturated colors have lots of additives. All right, now let's very quickly look at images. Images are combinations of color and shapes. We'll mostly be using stock photographs or cartoons or icons and so on. We'll surely look into our images later in a separate session. But for now, we need to keep certain things in mind. When choosing images, we need to pay attention to the file format, whether it's a raster type or a vector graphics type image. Raster types do not do well when you change the size. They become blurry. But vector type graphics can be resized without loss in quality. When choosing stock images, we need to make sure that it's not very generic. Otherwise, we'll risk the design becoming boring or distracting. And also, the stock image has to be unique. It has to bring out the intended quality or the message of the design. We can also edit the stock image to create a more unique feel and customize it. There are many ways of editing images. The simplest ones are cropping, resizing, adding filters, changing the saturation of the colors, and so on. If you're going to use an image as a background, say in a printed work or in a website, we need to make sure that it contrasts or complements the text or other elements of design nicely. All right, graphic design. Let's look into some nitty-gritties of the ideas and the elements that are used in design. Elements of design need not be a physical thing, as in like a shape or a color. It can be ideas too. Ideas can be used in different ways to create an effect in the design. These ideas influence how we make our choices, our design choices. Understanding these ideas, these subtleties, these nuances, helps us to become better designers. This is mainly achieved through studying other designs. For instance, let's take a look at this poster of the film Drive. Now, firstly, we need to notice that there are characters on the poster, and they all have different sizes. They're not of equal importance. That is the message that is sent. When we look at this, we immediately see, we get to know who the protagonist of the film is. That's the guy with the biggest face, and he has been repeated twice in the poster. And in order of importance, we see their faces change in their size. Second, let's look at the title of the film. First, we know that it's the title because it's the largest font. And we also notice the choice of the font. It seems kind of casual. It's cursive. It has kind of attitude. It's not formal. Also, the color is in stark contrast with the rest of the image, which tends to be kind of muted. There's a lots of gray added to the colors here. If you take the color palette as a whole, most of it is muted, and the text alone is in neon pink. Normally, this would be considered as bad design because they don't complement each other. They're in stark contrast, but that is what the designer wants to convey. There is something unexpected about this film. And this is further communicated through the text here in the bottom, which is asymmetrical. And it's also askew, it's inclined, it's at an angle. It suggests that this film may not be what we expect it to be, or there might be some surprises here. It creates intrigue. People get interested in something. It's not what they expect. And that quality is captured in the poster, and it kind of teases the person that there's more to expect of such unexpected things in the film itself. So as mentioned before, hierarchy is a way we give a relative importance to the elements of design in a project. Now in this poster here on the right, when we look at it, we immediately know the title of the event, the name of the event, where it's going to be, because it's at the smack center, and also where, when it's going to happen. Even though it's slowly a little lower, it has been framed, it has been put in a box, and there is an icon of a star next to it. Our eyes first look at the big text, the name, we get some idea. We look just below, we get a little more information about what it is. We find out where it's going to be, and then our eyes quickly look at the text within the box, and that gives us information about when it's going to happen. So this is known as hierarchy, how the information is given different importance in a design. The one in very small text is not very easy to read, or not very important for the viewer. As intended by the designer. Something that helps us with choosing hierarchy is grids. Taking any project and dividing the space with borders helps us to arrange the different elements within it, whether it be text or images and so on, and keep it in a more balanced way. And they also help us to provide meaning by creating framing, and even use empty spaces, the space between the elements of design, known as negative space, to create some form of communication. We will be looking more into these elements in the future sessions, and we'll do case studies. A couple of other ideas which you can find in different designs: contrast and symmetry. The image on the left is a poster for an event, and that has an asymmetrical, contrasting theme. The left side and the right side are very, very different. The left side is not real. It's a cartoon. It's a graphic. But on the right side, we have a more real, a photograph, something that really exists. And the designer has cleverly used various contrasts to make the image interesting. And this gets the poster easily noticed. Had it only been a graphic, or had it only been a photograph, it may not have had the same level of impact. The symmetry is how different parts of the image or the design are replicas of each other. Symmetry is associated with beauty. Anything that's symmetrical is pleasing to our eyes, our brain interprets them as beautiful. That's why circles are good, or people with highly symmetrical faces are considered attractive, and so on. Symmetry is highly used in logos, as you can see here. Of course, the most symmetrical object would be the circle or a sphere, which tends to be at least a frame for many of the logos. Logos can also have contrast in them, as seen in the one on the top right, one. Now, this is a very, very interesting logo design. The top and the bottom, they have different font styles, or it seems as though they have, and they have very different letter width, and they seem to be slightly askew. They've been moved away from each other to the side. This makes them very distinctive and memorable. And there are some mathematical or geometrical guidelines when it comes to creating not only better paintings or better photographs. Most pieces of art will follow a golden ratio to create the image more visually appealing. And photographs and even graphic design, in the case of business cards or web design, they use what is known as a rule of thirds to make the image more dynamic, more interesting, as if there is a motion to it. We will discuss rule of thirds in detail later. Let's be informed that there are geometrical techniques of creating active, dynamic, and interesting images and designs. We can also create effects of motion and depth. Motion in a static image is captured mainly through transparency of certain elements. On the poster on the left, we look at it, we immediately get the impression that there is a bicycle that's moving. And on the image on the top right, we get the impression that the wings of the hummingbird is flapping. By mimicking a long exposure photography, we are by using transparency in the shapes, we are able to create an illusion of motion. A similar illusion can be created of depth. Even if designs are on a screen or on a printed page, by layering them, like keeping some elements of the design before, above the other, like for example, how some of these leaves, they are over the boundary, the border, and even the letter gives an impression that there is a depth to this image. By using perspective and certain design tricks, you can also create convert a flat circle into what resembles a sphere, like a ball. So these are certain things that we can play with when it comes to design. Motion and depth. There are many, many more design elements to discover and to be used. But over the course of our training and our work, we will be encountering many of such elements. We need to develop a discerning eye, a designed eye, to find out what techniques, what ideas the designer used when creating such designs. Moving on to layout and composition. When we put all of these design elements together, we need to do a bit of a questionnaire. We need to answer some questions. Is the design balanced? Does the design have a logical hierarchy? Or the important information, is the important message getting the attention it deserves? Is the eye of the viewer, the user, uh, looking at what we want them to look at mostly? Studies have shown, as in the image represented on the left, the human eye tends to spend a lot of time on certain regions of the screen or a book. In a web page, that tends to be the top left region. Or kind of the human eye kind of forms a F-like pattern, or an E or a Z. And this is used in web design extensively, which is why the logo is usually on the top left. And when the eye scans the top header, that's where the most relevant information is placed for navigation. And then some supporting image or graphic is placed in the body. And then more important information is placed below. So knowing how a human tends to read a graphic, we can create a better layout or composition of the design. And then finally, designs, when used for in business, it's all about creating a brand identity and making it highly recognizable. The visual identity of a brand goes beyond its logo. Yes, by using the logo in multiple places consistently gives a sense of cohesion, that they are part of the same institution, part of the same company. Brand identity also includes color palette or even certain aspects of design. For example, in the bottom right, we see a persistent use of a certain type of pattern in the cups, in the boxes, even in adhesive tape, so as to create a consistency in branding. These designs themselves carry an identity of the brand. You don't need a logo, a small logo somewhere to be repeated. Designs can be, patterns can be, can aid in creating a brand identity. Now, brand identity can also include what kind of experience is being offered. Now here, when you compare these two call it menus, right, or information sheets you would find in a restaurant, you can clearly see the difference in the attitude of those establishments. On the left, we are looking at a restaurant that's more formal. They don't mention the price at all. It's not about it's a mention of discounts, or it's not about excess. It's not about value. It's more about a refined experience of dining. We see that it's a fine dining experience that is being offered just by looking at this menu card. Now on the right, we see that it's more casual. It's about providing the most for your money. So by choosing a style that best conveys the message, we are able to not only convey the essentials as to what product is offered, but we also can give an indication as to what kind of user experience the customer can expect. And good user experience, as mentioned before, is the foundation of good design, and that is what multiplies the customers for a business. So to conclude, at least for today, design is all about simplicity. Perfection may not ever be achieved, but the path toward perfection is achieved not by adding more and more elements, but coming to a point when no more elements can be taken away. So everything becomes essential to the design. It has to be highly, highly simple. Whether it's a single color, a single word, or a type of font, taking anything away or changing should create an adverse effect, should make the design bad. When we reach that point, then we could say that we have created a perfect design, or at least something that's close to perfection. So these are some of the references from which I got the ideas for today's presentation. And they all have a lot of resources to explore further about design and elements of design. Many more than what was covered today. And then hopefully in the next session, maybe we can talk about typography, get into the nitty-gritty details as to how to choose a font, how to alter, fine-tune it. You can learn about kerning and so on. We will get focus on different elements of design one by one as justified by its hierarchy, its importance, and create good designs for our projects. So yeah, thank you for staying with me, and hope you guys learned new things.